Thanks so much to all my patrons. Join now to help support the channel and help pick the books I review on this channel. Link in the description. And I am done. Okay, so I just got done reading The Way of Kings. This is book 1 of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts on finishing the book, which was literally just right now. So I loved it. It was awesome. I give this one a 5 stars. Pretty easy. And it's one that I already knew I'd give 5 stars because I've read it before and I gave it 5 stars the first time. But I didn't have a booktube channel when I read it, so I'm kind of going through and wanting to get through some of my favorite books on this channel. But it's also been a very convenient excuse to go through that because the 5th book of Stormlight Archive, which is my most anticipated book of the year by pretty long shot, is coming out in December. And so I want to get through the first 4 books again because it's been a couple years since I read them. And so my mind is fresh getting into that 5th book. And so what a great opportunity to go through and share with you my thoughts. So yeah, this is great. So the first time I read it, it was like my favorite book I ever read. And this was back before I really got back into fantasy. I'd read things like A Song of Ice and Fire a couple times years prior. I read Kingkiller Chronicle, and then I read this, and I had never read anything quite like this. And if you've read this, you know kind of what I'm talking about, but it's so well planned out, and it's so, I say it now, I say this, and it sounds negative, but I mean it in a good way, but it's like formulaic to have a good time. All the components are there to hook you in as a new reader into this series. And so on a second time through, I was very excited to go through this because Sanderson writes in a way where he doesn't just plan things out. You know, he may be like the most planned fantasy author out there. He has meticulously planned out all of the major plot points, all of the major characters, even a lot of subplot points for all of the 10 books. I mean, he knows when these things are going to come out. He knows how long they are. He knows everything that's going to happen, all the POV characters. And so to know that ahead of time and being able to write the first book knowing all of these things is really cool because they're able to put these things in and lay the seeds in these intro books so that they will be reaped later on. And so going through this second time, it's very rewarding because you're constantly given this information where you feel so smart because you're like, oh, I can't wait until this kind of comes back up in book 4. And being able to kind of figure out that kind of stuff, be able to play with it in your head. So that's extremely, extremely enjoyable. And it did not let me down. I've been looking forward to it. Didn't let me down. But what did let me down was that I had this image in my head that this book was kind of like one of the pinnacles of fantasy. And I've started to revise that opinion in the time that I've read a lot more. I mean, this book doesn't show up in my top 10, top 20 favorite books. Now, that's not like a horrible thing. I've read hundreds of books. It's still a very high tier book for me. And I thought about it that way. But going through this again, I feel lower on this than I did before I read it, even knowing that it was lowering on my tier list, because there are some glaring problems with this book that I didn't pick up on the first time. You know, and I suspect a lot of people, I'm going to keep this non-spoilers, so I'm going to kind of keep vague, but I'm guessing a vast majority of people that are watching this have already read it. But, you know, this story revolves around, and I'm not spoiling anything for you because it's pretty evident right at the beginning, but there's I think 4 different POV characters in this. One of them, Kaladin, which is probably the main character of this first story. Not probably, he is, because not only do you get probably the most amount of words for this character, but you also get flashback chapters of this character to talk about who that character is and why they are in the place that they are. And so it centers around this main character, and you learn very early on that something is special in a magical sense about this character. The main character doesn't know what. And you're given more than a few hints about what it is throughout the story, to the point where if you're reading it for your first time, you are realizing the extent of this guy's powers well before the main character does. That's not great, because, you know, when you're reading the first time, you're almost like pleading with the characters, like, hey, figure it out. I'm not even you when I figured it out. But reading this for the second time, it's painful. It's painful. Not the reading experience, but just like this character, and just you want to yell at him and be like, it's so obvious. You've written this kind of for children. Now, the content isn't for children. The themes were not for children. It's certainly not for, like, grimdark by any stretch of the imagination. This is heroic, epic fantasy where the good guy wins and we're only going to follow the good guys. And but that's hard, and it becomes a slog in many ways. I feel like this book could have been a couple hundred pages shorter and not really lost much. I mean, there's a lot of world building going in here that is vital, but there's too much time spent with Kaladin going over a lot of the same stuff. You know, how many bridge runs do I really have to read about for me to really get the message that this author is trying to give me? I would have enjoyed this book more had it spent some more time with the other characters. You know, 𝐶lʍn is a big one. Very few chapters were from 𝐶lʍn. Is it 𝐶lʍn? 𝐶lʍn? I'm going to say 𝐶lʍn. But very few chapters. And I know that this is not like a fan favorite character. And I don't get it because 𝐶lʍn's awesome. And I love the chapters of 𝐶lʍn. But, you know, that character's arc goes as molasses as well. You know, even more so. I mean, by the end of the arc of 𝐶lʍn in this first story, only one big event has happened. Or maybe a couple little, you know, I'd say two big events. A big realization that 𝐶lʍn has and a reveal of another character. And it's just, it goes very slow. In my head, I remembered more things happening in this first book, but apparently my brain tricked me because a lot of her arc happens in the second book, where the second book does the flashbacks and it's more 𝐶lʍn's book. And so those, I'd say, were my bigger complaints. The other complaint that I have, and I don't want to make this a big complaint fest because I love this book and I can't wait to talk about the things that I loved about it. But the other thing that kind of annoyed me here after reading so much fantasy is the overemphasis, I feel like, on the heroic side of things and the goodness of people and the morality of all the characters in a good way. It would have pleased me if we got a little more taste of both sides of this conflict. And there's a lot of conflicts going on, and you get so little of the quote unquote bad guys here that it's frustrating. I mean, my favorite books are the ones that give a lot of time to both sides of conflicts, because it makes you humanize those characters more. It makes you care for them, and it makes the drama so much greater when you actually have an attachment to bad characters that you don't necessarily want good things to happen to, but you're invested in them. You know, things like the First Law do this to perfection, where, you know, you're growing a bit of a weird attachment to these bad characters. So when their inevitable downfall comes, it's a lot more painful to the reader. You have all these conflicting feelings. And I wish there was more of that. You know, we get some of that later on in this series, but in the beginning here, it felt like painfully absent. So those are my complaints. But this book is awesome. You know, this book is really awesome. It's written in a pretty basic way, but the way that it's put together is magical. It tugs on my emotional heartstrings. Not because bad things are happening, not because people are dying, but because I want so many good things to happen to these people that I love, that when the good things finally do happen and they make the choices that you're hoping that they'll eventually realize they need to make themselves a better person, it is very special. I mean, I knew going into a few chapters later on in this book what was going to happen, this major event that happens on the Shattered Plains. And the first time I read it, I was very teary-eyed because I was so happy. And going around this time, I wondered if the same sort of, you know, emotion would come out. And it did. It did multiple times, where I just found myself extremely teary-eyed because finally these events are happening while I already know they're happening, living them again. And comically, I was on the couch reading one of these chapters and I started crying, and my wife comes into the room and she's like, "Are you crying?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "What happened?" And I was like, "Just the book." And she started laughing at me and making fun of me and being like, you're crying for a book? You didn't cry at our wedding. You didn't cry at the birth of our children, but you're crying because of a book? And I had to laugh, and it's like, yeah, and this isn't the first time that I read it. And she's just like fake mad at me the whole day about this. Emphasis on fake. You know, she's not. I don't think she's mad at me. She watches these videos. Sweetie, are you mad at me? I don't think you are. But yeah, that definitely occurred, and it's a wonderful way of writing to be able to pull that out, because I don't do that very often. And it just shows you the power of Sanderson's words and the way that he can write stories. You know, the world building here is, I knew it was awesome. It is truly great. I mean, it's truly great. And I don't just mean, you know, getting lost in this world. I don't mean the huge map that we know that we get to explore that's very well built out. But I mean, there's so many flavorful items here that are just so great in their detail. I mean, the author has created this whole, multiple cultures. They've created a landscape where you have to envision there's no grass. I mean, there's these rocks, there's these weird weather patterns that can make these grasses come out of the rocks themselves. There's these huge high storms that come through every handful of days and wreck everything because of how powerful they are. And the currency that you have are these spheres that when you put them out in the high storm, they grow light, they get dimmer over time. And, that power can transfer into other powers, and the depth of the magical powers that these people have, and everybody's got 2 of them, and there's all these combos of powers that you can have that are all these different names, and it's really, really well done. I mean, it feels like Sanderson was pulling pulling everything out of his bag of tricks, and it worked so well. I mean, it just made me. I often think about how incapable I would be of writing a fantasy book, from the fact that I'm not a good writer to my prose. And I love reading authors that can make me feel like they're so much better than I could ever be with practice. And Sanderson is one of those authors. And his superpower is his ideas and the meticulous planning that he does to go into his stories. Because I could spend my whole life trying to come up with ideas, and I wouldn't come up with what he just spewed out here. And he's spewed out 10 plus magic systems since he wrote this one. I mean, the guy is a genius, and I love him for it. And I can't wait to read all of the books that he ever pumps out because of how special he is at this sort of thing he does. But it's extremely, extremely well done. I mean, the magic here is just great, and there's very little of it in this first story. But what we do get is teased out in such a way, and especially if you've read it before and you're starting to see him kind of come into fruition, it's wonderful stuff. So, yeah, just absolutely great. I feel like the characters here were better than I remembered them. I mean, I knew there was writing issues here that are overemphasized, I think. I mean, Sanderson gets a lot of hate, and he gets a lot of hate because he's so popular. I mean, whatever authors are the biggest and the greatest are going to attract those pessimists, or I don't think they're really necessarily pessimists, but they're like the cool kids who don't, they don't want to like the popular stuff, and I was like that when I was like a teenager where, I didn't read Harry Potter, for example, when everybody was reading, because I'm like, oh no, that's what everybody's doing. I want to be cooler than that. And I was dumb. I should have jumped on board. I should have read it and gone along with the hype. Just like people are kind of dumb when they criticize Sanderson, and they pick on him for these things like, oh, his prose is nothing special. No, it's not. But is it bad? No, it's not at all. So I had forgotten that he's a much better writer than I kind of thought he was when he wrote this book. And I mean, the people that criticize him for this stuff are almost shameful in the way that they go about it, because they're just, showing how immature they really are and just trying so hard to find something that they hate about somebody that's far more successful than their favorite authors. But, be that as it may, maybe there are real criticisms people have, and I shouldn't say something like that. But in general, I feel like that encompassed a lot of the hate that he gets. But yeah, the prose is decent. It's good. I mean, he has some quotes in there that are really, really great. The average level prose is not, the greatest of the genre, but whatever. It's good stuff. But man, the stuff that he does really well, it's really, really cool. So can't wait to kind of keep going on the series. I'm excited. I'm locked in. I'm going to be reading them at a much faster pace than I normally do, because normally I give myself like 4 or 5 months between reading books in a series just because of my huge backlog. But I'm committed to getting all these done before December so that I could read that 5th book. I forgot the name of it now. Something Truth or something. I don't know. We'll see. But I can't wait for it. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Amy, Anna G, CJ, Doust, Darren, JD, Jonathan, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝐿, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Slay, Sydney Baker, Tahir, Zion, Anna, Andra, Blair, Brock, Evan, Harry W, Joe UK, Kat Mick, Michael Sugarman, Sky, and Tyler. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.